On January 6, 1994, just weeks before the 1994 Winter Olympics, American figure skater Nancy Kerrigan came off the ice from a practice session at Detroit's Cobo Hall only to be assaulted by an unknown assailant. The shocking attack raised so many questions, but as Nancy Kerrigan screamed in anguish, grabbing her leg, just weeks before the biggest moment of her life, she was the one screaming the only question everyone wanted to know. Why? You probably already know this, but just in case you were living on Mars, in a cave, with your eyes shut, and your fingers in your ears,
Touché, Cecil.
Nancy Kerrigan was attacked because of a woman named Tonya Harding. Now, I'm not here to debate Harding's level of involvement in the attack on Kerrigan. She's always denied that she was involved, while others put the blame solely on her. We'll probably never know the full story, so let's stick to the facts, and the fact is the attack did take place with the intention of benefiting Tonya Harding. Kerrigan is one of her biggest rivals, and people in the Harding camp, including Coen Brothers character come-to-life named Jeff Gillooly, felt that eliminating Kerrigan in the competition was Harding's best chance of success. It didn't take long for investigators to figure out who committed the attack, and within days, Harding's name was mud. Whether it's justified or not didn't matter. Tonya Harding was now the most hated woman in America.
I'm gonna be pretty, just like you, just like Nancy. Pretty Nancy.
It's really easy to see where this story compares to pro wrestling. A dastardly heel can't beat her plucky hero cleanly, so instead she sends a goon to injure her and steal the championship. I just named you most of Ric Flair's storylines in the 80s. Like all great wrestling stories, the Nancy and Tonya feud had to reach its conclusion on the big stage, and this one came with the 1994 Winter Olympic Games in Lillehammer, Norway. And what a conclusion it was. Somehow, our hero, Nancy Kerrigan, battled back from that injury and is able to not only compete at the Olympics, but puts on the performance of a lifetime and wins the silver medal. Oksana Bayul won the gold. Okay, I mean that's good, but I don't think that's the finish people expected. It's not what Tonya Harding expected either. She finished in a disappointing 8th place. Nobody knew it at the time, but Nancy and Tonya would never compete against each other again. The feud was over. I mean, the story had a hell of a build, but lacked a great conclusion. Not that anybody noticed or cared, though. People were still reeling from the roller coaster of emotions Tonya and Nancy took them on. You had to know that somebody in pro wrestling was going to try and see if they could capture that magic. You just never would have been able to guess who it was. In March of 1994, just a few weeks after the Olympics, a story hit the Associated Press about an offer for Tonya Harding to become a pro wrestler. Except this offer didn't come from Vince McMahon or Ted Turner. This offer came from Takeshi Matsunaga, the chairman of All Japan Women's Professional Wrestling Alliance, better known as AJW. AJW was a Japanese women's wrestling company that emphasized a much more athletic style than its American counterpart. Matsunaga thought a world-class athlete the caliber of Harding could fit in well and was offering her $2 million to train with AJW. Now, that $2 million figure didn't just come out of thin air. That figure was chosen because that's how much Disney paid Nancy Kerrigan in endorsements. I know Nancy, but Matsunaga was quoted as saying, "If that's what Disney's paying Nancy Kerrigan, that's what we'll pay Tonya, even if I have to go into debt to do it." Surprisingly, the story picked up a lot of mainstream attention, even at Sports Illustrated quoting Japanese women's wrestling Aja Kong. "If I'm to fight her, I'd better be careful that I don't get attacked before the bout." Another Joshi legend, Akira Hokuto, offered to train Tonya Harding herself in the ways of the heel wrestler. You're probably asking yourself at this point, how real was this offer? And the answer is... kind of, I guess. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was definitely a publicity stunt, but AJW seemed sincere and wanted to try to sign Harding. Their hope was to train her in time to debut later that year at a retirement show for Akira Hokuto, a show they were hoping to sell at the massive Tokyo Dome in Japan. AJW figured the novelty of Harding in pro wrestling would open up the previously closed, but very lucrative, American pay-per-view market. It's easy to see why they thought signing Harding would work, as even the thought of Harding as a pro wrestler was national news. People were very curious of the idea of her wrestling. References to the potential for Tonya Harding as a wrestler even made its way to the mandatory rip-from-the-headlines made-for-TV movie they made about the ordeal, Tonya and Nancy, The Inside Story.
Except one Tokyo promoter who tried to get her to wrestle on the Japanese circuit for millions of dollars as Tonya the Terrible. See, some fairy tales don't have a happy ending.
And this fairy tale isn't an exception. Despite hopes from AJW, the deal never came to pass. A March meeting in Japan never materialized. Reportedly, AJW officials came to Portland to try to get a deal done, but that went nowhere too. So why didn't this happen? I mean, the most likely theory is, come on, this was never going to actually happen. Sure, AJW wanted Tonya Harding. They just didn't actually want her $2 million worth. That's Nancy Kerrigan money. Dave Meltzer in his Wrestling Observer newsletter reported the real number was significantly less than what Matsunaga had told the press. The actual offer was $380,000 for 50 dates. Well, that is a lot of money. I'm not entirely sure Harding would have seen it as worth it. AJW was a company with a legendarily brutal wrestling style, and even though she was a world-class athlete, I don't think she was willing to risk her body for that money. There was also the whole, just pled guilty to obstruction of justice, which is a crime thing, which probably would have made traveling overseas a lot more difficult. The most fun reason comes from WWE executive Bruce Pritchard, who claimed on his Something to Wrestle podcast that WWE actually wanted to bring her in for WrestleMania 10, but Tonya may have been using the AJW offer publicity as leverage to get more money out of them.
Yeah, we did consider doing something with Tonya Harding and bringing her in and having her get her ass kicked. She wasn't interested. I think that maybe because we were interested at one time, we had floated that idea out there that maybe her manager had heard, or someone in her camp was like, hey, you could get a lot of money in Japan, and floated it out that way, thinking that maybe they could get a big payday.
It was never clear how serious Tonya took the idea of getting into wrestling. On one hand, when someone asked her if she was going to get involved, she was reported as saying, "Give me a break." On the other hand, she appeared on Portland Talk Radio and prank called celebrities asked if they wanted to wrestle her, which led to this really weird article by Andy Rooney about how he could kick Tonya Harding's ass. The article has no bearing on the story, and I probably should have cut it for time, but I can't stop thinking about how unhinged Andy Rooney comes off in this, and I felt that the world needed to know. Sadly, we wouldn't see Tonya Harding wrestle Andy Rooney, or Akira Hokuto, or Aja Kong, or anyone else, and she would never step foot in a wrestling ring.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Exciting to be here and to be part of this group of wonderful people, wonderful wrestlers, and great athletes.
You can never really figure out Tonya Harding, can you? On June 20th, 1994, in her first public appearance since the Olympics, Tonya Harding appeared at a press conference in Portland, Oregon to announce she would be making an appearance as a manager at an upcoming wrestling event in Vancouver, Washington. She was scheduled to manage local star Brian Cox along with Los Gringos Locos, a tag team composed of Love Machine Art Barr and future WWE Hall of Famer Eddie Guerrero. Quote, singer, artist, composer, talking head, David Byrne, how did we get here? Wrestling in Portland had been on the decline for several years ever since Vince McMahon amped up his national expansion and raided the various wrestling territories across the country. Longtime promoter Don Owen had stepped down and given control over to a gentleman named Sandy Barr. Sandy began promoting under the name of Championship Wrestling USA. It wasn't going great. Their local weekly television was relegated to cable access, the crowds weren't coming in. On top of all of that, Sandy's Oregon wrestling license was suspended, meaning he was having to promote most of his shows in the neighboring state of Washington. What Sandy did have, though, was a son on the rise. His son was the Love Machine Art Barr, who begun making a name for herself in Mexico as part of the Los Gringos Locos tag team with Eddie Guerrero. Together, they were the hottest acts in the Mexican lucha libre promotion AAA, and started making waves in the United States as well. You see, AAA had started touring the American market, and earlier that year, the Luchadors had sold out the 13,000-seat Los Angeles sports arena. The product was starting to pick up steam. Art also happened to be friends with Tonya Harding. I don't know how or why they became friendly. Maybe it has something to do with being two of the more controversial figures in Portland. This is strictly conjecture on my part, but it's hard not to think that part of Art's motivation was to make a statement with a huge show, return to the Pacific Northwest as a conquering hero. As for Tonya's motivation, well, like the great American philosopher Andrew Dice Clay said,
he needed the money. Oh!
Don't get me wrong, by all intents and purposes, Tonya was a pro wrestling fan, but she seemed mainly there for the reportedly $5,000 she was promised. The Bar's investment seemed to pay dividends immediately, as the press conference created a bit of a media circus. Legendary Lucha Libre star Conan was at that press conference and talked about it on his Keeping It 100 podcast.
We got out of the plane And there was so much press, it was ridiculous. And I was like, holy shit, we're really going to have a good house. And everybody ran past us to go to Tonya.
Promoter Sandy Barr went all out. He booked the show at the Clark County Fairgrounds, a 10,000-seat venue in Vancouver, Washington, fully expecting to make his money back. He invested in lasers and smoke machines and live music. Local news broadcasts scheduled their evenings around making sure to go live just in time for the main event. They made a bet that the combo of rising AAA luchadors and the curiosity factor of Tonya Harding would be just the thing to get Portland wrestling back on the map. And so, on June 22nd, 1994, after much fanfare and build, Tonya Harding emerged from the curtain and finally into the world of pro wrestling in front of a raucous crowd of 530 people.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
Just some quick math for you. 530 is a lot less than 10,000. The show was a disaster. On the financial side, the show allegedly cost promoter Sandy Barr $30,000. He actually stopped running shows for a while after this. According to Portland Wrestling historian and Defy Wrestling promoter Matt Farmer on the Portland cast with Jim Valley, a big issue was the lack of promotion.
I remember going down there early and looking for posters because I wanted to grab a poster for the event. And there was nothing. There was no promotion going on. It was really weird. Nobody knew that this was taking place.
The fans that did show up didn't care that Tonya was there. One fan was quoted in the Vancouver Columbian as saying, "We didn't come because of her. We came because of the wrestlers." Okay, so what if people didn't show up? I bet the novelty of her at ringside managing Eddie Guerrero still makes it worth watching.
No.
Tonya Harding does manage her guys, technically. She just happens to manage them from very, very, very far away from the ring. Even though Sandy Barr was running shows in Washington to avoid the Oregon Wrestling Commission, it didn't mean the Washington one was any easier. As Eddie Guerrero wrote in his book Cheating, Death, Stealing Life, it was a fiasco from the word go. Under Oregon State Boxing and Wrestling Commission rules, Tonya wasn't an officially licensed manager, and as such, she wasn't allowed at ringside. We all walked out together, then Tonya went and sat down in a folding chair about halfway up the aisle. Tonya ended up handing a glass of water to Art Barr to use in the finish of the match, snapped some photos, and went on with her life. When the Vancouver Columbian asked her what she thought, she quickly replied with, "Yeah, it was fun." And that was it. For real this time. There aren't any more fake outs about her involvement in pro wrestling. To bring it oddly full circle, Tonya put the bow out on herself when she was interviewed for Japan's Fuji TV.
Even being promoted to become a professional wrestler.
No. I was just a manager for one event to help bring people in for their event, and that was it.
Ultimately, I think it was probably best that Tonya Harding never got involved in pro wrestling. The idea of Tonya Harding the wrestling heel made sense on paper, but nowhere else. Whether she was involved in the attack on Nancy Kerrigan or not, Harding never seemed comfortable playing that up for the camera. The character of Tonya Harding in the media didn't appear to mesh with the actual human being. One of the things I found interesting from all accounts about this night is how everyone talks about how timid and nice Tonya Harding was. Late pro wrestler Brian Cox was in the match and in a shoot interview said,
"She was actually very timid and she really didn't say much. She was very nice."
What about in the ring?
No, she kind of sat there. I don't know if she had fun or not. I know she's a big wrestling fan, but...
In his book, Eddie Guerrero even mentioned, Tonya Harding was actually very nice, quiet, and sweet. Not all like the crowbar swinging hoe the press made her out to be. I never thought I'd say this, but I guess Tonya Harding was just too nice for pro wrestling. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please subscribe. I don't know if I'll diatribe for this yet, but I will eventually. So, the sooner you subscribe, the less I have to do these.